Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast. This is Matt Kirchner, your host. We talk all the time on the podcast about how we love our technical and community colleges across the United States of America. It's an option that for a long time, a lot of students maybe weren't even aware of, weren't necessarily considering. And as we move into the future of education, giving students options as they move out of secondary education into whatever comes after, whether that's going to the workforce, whether it's going to a university, whether it's going into the military, choosing one of our great technical and community colleges across the United States of America. I believe more and more students are waking up to the fact that they've got options, and for so many of them, the technical and community college route is a perfect option. We're going to talk about that and a number of other topics today with an individual who leads an institution I know well. It's Lakeshore College in my home state of Wisconsin. Paul Carlsen is the president there, doing incredible things, really, really innovative things at that college. And so as we get into this conversation with Paul, let's keep a couple things in mind. First of all the great opportunities for our students and others at our community and technical colleges, and also the fact that education is innovating now at warp speed. And what education looked like 10 years ago isn't what education looks like today. And more important, what education is going to look like 5 and 10 years from now isn't what it looks like today. And so we're in this phase of incredible disruption, incredible innovation. And with me to talk about all of that is Paul Carlsen, president of Lakeshore College. And Paul, thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, Matt, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk about all the great things of Lakeshore Technical College and the Wisconsin Technical College system with you.
Absolutely. And there are many great things, and I've seen them firsthand taking place at Lakeshore College. I want to start by talking a little bit about your background, which is kind of an interesting and I think an invigorating background into the world of education and technical education, both in terms of geographically where you were spending time and the types of roles that you were in. So you kind of came of age in the world of workforce development and economic development, even more important in the Southeast in states like Louisiana and South Carolina. So talk a little bit about how, as opposed to maybe somebody who came up through a traditional education route, your background in economic development influences the way you think about leading Lakeshore College.
Yeah, so right out of grad school, Matt, took a job with the South Carolina Department of Commerce, and then about a year and a half later, took a job with Louisiana Economic Development, their statewide economic development entity. And I really enjoyed economic development work. It's where the public sector and the private sector intersect. And it gave me a front seat viewing of the transformational impact good jobs can have on communities, on people and families. But those good jobs aren't going to come to places unless there are, 1, people to fill those jobs, 2, people with the skills to fill those jobs, or 3, people who have the capacity to get the skills to fill the job. So really liked working in that sector, connecting families with good paying jobs at places like Boeing, BMW, Sasol, IBM. And then I just had this opportunity in working in the Louisiana government to start collaborating with the Louisiana Community and Technical College system on how we could be working together to bring large economic development projects to areas and provide training for them. And that was my first foray into two-year colleges. Then I had the opportunity to make a transition from economic development to that same system, the Louisiana Community Technical College system. And that's where I just fell in love with 2-year open access community and technical colleges where people are going to get skills, to take jobs that will have transformational impacts for generations in their family.
I think back to my days, Paul, of running manufacturing companies here in the Midwest and doing expansions in other states. And it used to be the first thing we would look at when we were expanding into a new territory is proximity to customers and proximity to suppliers, right? Super, super important to drive some of that transportation waste out. The second thing we would look at would be things like economic incentives. In other words, who is willing to give us the best tax breaks or the most funding to participate in expansion. And then the third thing maybe, or maybe even further down the list, was workforce, right? And now when you look at how organizations, manufacturing companies and others are thinking about expanding into a new geography, really that workforce piece is the absolute first thing. Is that what you were finding when you were in states like Louisiana and South Carolina, that over the course of time became more and more important?
Yeah, to the point where it was the primary driver of site selection. Because when we were down in the Southeast and the Gulf Coast and that area, at the end of the day, most of the incentive packages were relatively equal once you got to that final stage. So they're all on a level playing field in that sense when you add everything up. But it's that availability of workers, right? The availability of skilled workers, access to training institutions like community and technical colleges, access to universities. So not just the people, but the capacity to upskill those people became a principal driver, especially on major projects that were employing hundreds, thousands of people, giant capital expenditure investments. They need the people to fill them.
Exactly. And so you've got access to workforce, current workers that can fill positions as they're becoming open. And so that's really, really important. What is the skill set in the workforce in the area into which I'm expanding? And then the other question or the other thought on this, and I'll put it into a baseball analogy, but the Brewers have built an amazing baseball team primarily through their farm system. And then we think about the farm system in a state like Louisiana or South Carolina or Wisconsin. And to us, I think about that farm system for labor, that farm system for a skilled workforce really is in many ways our technical and community colleges, right? That's where we're creating the next generation of talent. That's where we're going to build the World Series of economic development in the next 5 or 10 years by building that incredible talent in the community colleges. And as we mentioned in the intro, I think more and more, not just students, but actually employers as well are starting to understand the importance of that farm system in the context of a community or technical college. Do you see the same thing where we're not only just looking at what is the availability of my workforce today, but they're also doing due diligence on what is the ability of the education system in whatever region that is to create that next generation of talent?
Oh, absolutely. And when you think of community and technical colleges, the farm system is a really great analogy there because for Lakeshore College, we have 98% of our students are local. And when they graduate, they stay local. And that statistic is common across the two-year college sector. So I really have to think of them as a farm system for employers, for the backbones of communities. But absolutely. So companies that are expanding, companies that are relocating, or simply trying to retain where they are looking more deeply at community and technical colleges and their capacity to not just deliver skills today, but how can they scale what they're doing to meet the workforce needs of tomorrow and the next decade.
And I want to hang for a moment on something you said about 98% of your students are coming from the region. I guess that doesn't surprise me so much, right? I mean, if you're living in a specific region, you're going to go to a technical college, you're probably going to the technical college in the district or the region that you live in, most likely. But 98% of them stay. I mean, that is, so they're getting a skill. And it doesn't matter whether that's in healthcare, whether it's in advanced manufacturing, whether it's in public safety, law enforcement, what have you. They're staying in their local community. I didn't realize the number was that high. That's fascinating.
Yeah, when you think about the typical age of a student at Lakeshore College is 26 years old. There'll be some deviation from that at technical colleges across the state, but that's going to hold generally for most of them. But when you think of a 26-year-old coming to a technical college, they often are established in the community, right? They graduated high school in the community. Perhaps they're working in the community. Many of our students have children. And they're coming to the college to provide a better life for their children and their families and themselves. So they're already established in the community. And we're very fortunate in Northeast Wisconsin to have tons of major employers who will invest in their employees to go and upskill and provide them a career trajectory where they've already started working right out of high school.
So many points that you made there that I think are important to note. The first one is we always think, or at least I often think about technical and community colleges as an amazing choice to be making after high school. But it doesn't always necessarily mean right after high school. If the average age is 26, and we both know that moves around a little bit, but it's usually somewhere in the mid-20s, kind of depending upon what's going on in the rest of the economy. So if the average student is a 26-year-old student, obviously most of those, if not all those people, are already in the workforce. They're already working. They're upskilling. Maybe they've been affected by some kind of a dislocation in the workforce or in an employer, so they're coming back to school on a full-time basis to gain skills to move their career forward. Maybe they're studying, probably likely studying while they have a job as well, and raising a family and doing all these other things. So just a really good example of how important that aspect of our technical and community college system is the fact that we're reaching not just students coming out of high school and deciding what they want to do for the rest of their life, or at least for the next step in their career, but also individuals that are in some cases well into their working life and coming back either on their own or maybe with the support of their employer to gain skills as we advance into this new economy, which is changing, as you and I both know, incredibly quickly. So I'd be curious, you spent time in the Southeast. Did you grow up there? I should ask you that.
No, I grew up in Colorado, and I ended up in the Southeast when I went to get my doctorate. Went to the University of Georgia. I was on an NSF grant, and then just stayed in the region after that.
Got it.
Yeah.
So starting in Colorado, which is another state that I love. What part of Colorado?
Colorado Springs. My dad was in the service.
Awesome.
Retired there in 1993.
Oh, beautiful. Yep. Interstate 25 shoots right, I think, south from Denver to Colorado Springs, and spent my fair share of time in that area as well. Beautiful, beautiful area, as is the Southeast, as is, in some cases, I would say, no more beautiful place than Wisconsin.
No, I agree with that.
Awesome. So I've been here my whole life, so my opinion is probably a bit biased, but for someone who spent other time in other places, beautiful, beautiful state. What made you decide, A, to come to a state like Wisconsin in the Midwest, and B, to lead a community college, a technical college in this case, like Lakeshore College?
Sure. I got to a point with the Louisiana Community Technical College system where I was working in their system office with a lot of oversight. And that system office at the time provided governance for 12 community technical colleges across the state. And I liked the system work. I liked creating structures that were impacting two-year colleges statewide. But what I found that I liked more than all that stuff was interacting with students. And you just don't have a lot of time to do that at the system office. Students don't enroll at the system office. They go to the various colleges. And I got to a point where I thought, man, I think I'm ready to captain my own ship here. And even though there's 1,100 two-year colleges across the country, right, they don't all have openings at once. But I was contacted by a recruiter when an opening came at Lakeshore College. The previous president had announced his retirement, Mike Lancer, a longtime college employee, longtime, very impactful, great college president. And as I started to look at Lakeshore College, it checked a lot of boxes for us. One, it's a small community and technical college, and that allows it to pivot quicker than just a large behemoth college. And it was workforce focused. So in Louisiana, that is a very workforce focused system. So that was something I wanted to make sure I was investing my time and energy into an institution that was workforce focused. But it also had local control. So that's something I think that's very important for a community and technical college, that it's locally governed and that the entire community has skin in the game for that institution's success. So it checked a lot of those boxes. The region checked a ton of boxes in Northeast Wisconsin for my family and I. Very safe communities. Public schools are really fantastic in Northeast Wisconsin.
For sure.
You have 4 seasons and a great quality of life. So in Louisiana, if we were still there, our girls would be taking buses to school. It would take them about 30, 45 minutes to get there. Right now, we live in the village of Kohler. We live a block from the school. Our girls walk to and from. There's bikes on everybody's yard. Super safe. Great community for a family.
Absolutely. Wonderful, wonderful community. And I think you did a nice job of comparing and contrasting, Paul, the difference between the quality of life in Northeast Wisconsin. And your college, by the way, for our listeners, is probably, about an hour north of Milwaukee, maybe, give or take?
Yeah, Cleveland, Wisconsin. Great village, just right on the county line between Sheboygan and Manitowoc counties.
Yep, exactly. So very much on the eastern end of the state, right over by Lake Michigan, a little bit north of Milwaukee. Beautiful, beautiful area. So you talked about the experiences your family's having and your kids are having in terms of proximity to school and so on, difference, how it would have been in Louisiana. Other differences you would see, particularly technical community colleges between the Southeast, are there maybe more similarities than differences, but what are some of the differences that you would note?
Some similarities, I think, at all two-year college nationwide is a fundamental commitment to the open access mission of teaching the student who walks through your doors. We don't make students go through an application process. We don't turn anybody away. So at every college, every two-year college, from faculty to staff to presidents, they're all really focused on that mission, which is phenomenal. I think something that's really unique in Wisconsin is our laser alignment with our local employers.
Sure.
And every program, every degree the college offers has an industry advisory board made up of people who are employed in the fields that will hire those graduates. And those advisory boards can go from 10 people to 20 people. And they're giving feedback and telling our college what skills need to be taught, what equipment needs to be used so that our graduates are set up for maximum success in the workforce when they graduate. You have advisory committees throughout the sector in some states and not others. But in Wisconsin, and I say this in a good way, it's like advisory committees on steroids that create a real stickiness for the college and our employers. And that's true of all the Wisconsin Technical College system schools. I think that really sets our system apart from the rest of the country.
And I think you make an important point, the distinction between a non-centralized model and a centralized model for technical and community colleges. And not that one is necessarily good or bad or better or worse, because there's advantages to both. But you think about a state like Indiana, Ivy Tech, which is their statewide technical community college system. In a lot of ways, the entire system moves in unison. Certain benefits to that, certainly in terms of getting things done, implementation, standardization, and so on, as opposed to a state like Wisconsin, 16 technical colleges across the state of Wisconsin, every one of them with their own board. And there is a state system, but almost all the decisions are made at the local level. A lot of the funding comes from the local level. And then to your point, the connection you have to your individual employers and the ability to pivot the college in whatever direction your employers are thinking you need to go. There is a difference. And I spend time with both models, and we see both of them across the Midwest and across the United States. But that is an important distinction for Wisconsin.
Yeah, very well said. And to go back to the Kohler Company, I think a great example of that is a little over 10 years ago, the Kohler Company came to the college. Then President Lancer was running the college. And Kohler said, hey, you need to expand and modernize your advanced manufacturing footprint.
Right.
And because we are decentralized and Kohler is a major employer, we were able to say, yeah, let's do that. Right. So Kohler helped guide that project that was ultimately the Kohler Center for Manufacturing Excellence. Mm-hmm. But we also had other major employers as part of that. We had Sargento, Johnsonville, Hayden. And so we have that nimbleness that when an employer says, hey, we really need you to change course here, we can do that.
Right.
And we don't have to wait for an entire state apparatus to get on board for it to happen.
So that flexibility really, really important in terms of working with employers, in terms of serving whatever stakeholders we have outside of our students, which are really, really important, probably the most important aspect of a community college. But being able to pivot and change and cater to specific groups of employers to make sure that we're creating that workforce that they're looking for, that's a key aspect. Another key aspect of flexibility in education, I believe, is making sure that we're tying competencies to what those employers are looking for, right? And you think about a typical associate degree program, 4 semesters, a whole series of courses, all broken down into credits, can be further broken down into competencies. And you know where I'm going with this. You're a huge advocate for competency-based education and a leader in that regard. Tell our audience a little bit about CBE, why it's important, and how the college is flexing its model around competencies.
Yeah, so competency-based education, or CBE, transitions learning from time-based to competency-based. And so you gave a great example of under a time-based model, an associate degree takes 2 years. And you have your classes aligned sequentially, and you have to spend your 2 years getting that degree.
Right.
Regardless of what you already know coming into it, you still have to wait your time to get that degree. Regardless of how quickly you can learn, you still have to wait the 2 years. Or if you need a little bit more time, you can not really get it, but as long as you keep a C, you can continue to graduate in that 2-year time. And when I think about a C, right, a C grade, many of us wouldn't buy a house if it was inspected and the grades were A, B, C, D, and F, and you got a C. We'd probably say, I don't know if we want that.
Right.
So we said, well, let's turn this model upside down into a competency-based model. So under competency-based education, we've taken an associate degree, working with our employers, and just found every competency that is part of that degree. And when a student comes in, they can come in 8 times throughout the year, and they can demonstrate competencies at the speed that makes sense for them, as fast as they want to or as slow as they want to. Although we want them to go fast because people want degrees to better their life, so we want them to graduate sooner rather than later.
Right.
They do too. But what's great about the competency-based model, in addition to the student flexibility, is you either know the competency or you don't.
Right.
And you get multiple attempts to demonstrate your skill level, and you don't move on to the next competency until you're met the previous competencies. So what we found is these competency-based programs that we've rolled out, in fact, now more than 50% of our degrees are competency-based education. We're seeing more and more incumbent workers coming to the college to say, hey, I took a couple of classes in CNC machining 3 or 4 years ago,
right,
and I got a job after the first semester. And because of the previous time-based model, I had to choose between working and paying the bills or come into school between 8 and 5 when I was working. I just can't do that. But with the competency-based model, they're saying, hey, now I have the flexibility to have my job and then learn outside of that job at a pace that makes sense for me, which has been really fantastic. And so, like I said, over half of our programs are competency-based education.
Wow.
And I will brag a little bit here. We are a leader on this front.
Well, you went to the White House to talk about
I did,
this, right?
yeah. And we talked there about how we scaled it, right? And we rapidly scaled it post-COVID. One, because our board of trustees encouraged us to go in that direction. And once we had success, our first program was CNC machining, where we had an awesome group of faculty said, we want to try CBE.
Yep.
They hit a home run. And then you know how that is. You have success happening in one part and people say, hey, well, what's happening over there? I think I'd like to be part of that success. And it snowballed. And so we take a lot of pride in being a CBE institution. Requires a ton of work from everybody at the college. You change systems. You change how you process federal financial aid, how you advise students. You change how you teach students. But, I applaud everyone at the college for all their great work in making it possible because we believe it ultimately produces a better education for the students, especially on the skills trade side, because again, they are graduating having met all those competencies. They're not meeting a C level, They meet them or they don't. And so we're producing more quality graduates from a workforce perspective who are able to hit the ground running wherever they end up working.
Well, and as somebody who spent all those years, as I did, running manufacturing companies here in the state of Wisconsin and around the Midwest, I kind of think about the analogy you use about, do you want the C house or do you want the A house? If you're hiring a student, a graduate, do you want the C student or do you want the A student? And the answer is, I'm less concerned about what grade they got and more concerned about, do they know how to do what I'm hiring them to do? And so this whole competency-based model says, we're going to make sure that you have that competency. And oh, by the way, if you're a high flyer and you can zip through this stuff and you already got it or you learned it in another job or whatever, we're not going to make you sit through that again. If you're a student and we all have our areas in which we take a little bit more time, I certainly do. If you're a student that needs a little bit more time or maybe takes a couple swings in order to hit the ball, no worries. You're going to take your time. You're going to go through that at your pace. And what's important isn't how quickly you got through it. What's important isn't necessarily that letter that goes after your name or your grade or that course. What's important is, do you know it or do you not know it?
Yeah. And to add to everything you just said there, Matt, it also creates an instructional model where it is tailored to each individual person, not to a classroom.
Great point.
And I think about my time in college, there were some things that I need a little more time on. I just didn't get, but it didn't matter. We were all
Cost accounting was one of mine, by the way. Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah. Anything math related for me. So yeah.
I hear you.
But we all moved on at the same time. But now with CBE, again, everyone's moving at their own pace, and our faculty have really rethought and repurposed how they're teaching and approaching students and having more impactful student interaction, student teaching moments than they were previously, because again, you're customizing for that individual student. And one other thing I want to add about a CBE is, even though we deconstructed the degrees and the competencies, students still graduate with a associate degree.
Right.
And they still have a transcript with grades on it. That's a lot of back office kind of crosswalks that happen there, but it's still a college degree, fully accredited, fully financial aid eligible, fully transferable.
So it checks both boxes. We're not blowing up the model. It's still a traditional associate's degree. However, we're also basing it on competencies, so you get the best of both worlds. We joke sometimes, Paul, in education, that change comes to education one retirement at a time, or I've even heard it put one death at a time. That's a little bit morbid. You talked about like your CNC faculty that said, we want to lead on this. I'm asking a loaded question because in any organization, we know that there are people that might be a little bit slower to change. Talk about that change management. Did everybody jump on board, or how do you work through some of those changes over time?
Well, it was not overnight.
Right.
And like, is your loaded question there, people hopped on board with varying degrees of energy and excitement.
Sure.
So CNC was where we started because people were jobbing out. That was a program where you had good enrollments, low retention, low graduation rates. And we're thinking, how can you maintain a program like this where folks are leaving after the first semester?
And jobbing out is, as you speak slang, of course, for those that may not know that word, it's you're halfway through or partway through a degree program, and your skills that you've gained are so valuable to the marketplace that an employer comes in and swoops you up and employs you before you complete your degree.
And that's a win for the student who was coming to get a better life for them and their families.
Of course.
But we had created that structure that allowed, once somebody jobbed out, that prevented them from coming back. Because again, we weren't altering anything, right? In terms of hours and all that. So they dived into that program, really led us on that front to be our first program to shift to CNC machining. Success brought in another group of folks because jobbing out is something that's relevant to all of our manufacturing programs. And so education has evolved a ton over the centuries it's been around. We were simply at a point in our environment in Northeast Wisconsin where unemployment continues to be record low. Our advanced manufacturing companies in Manitowoc and Sheboygan counties need more and more people. That we were looking at, the long-term viability of an institution that continues to do what it always did. That came into question. So how are we going to evolve to make sure we're relevant today and tomorrow? It takes time to change structures, and we were no different at Lakeshore College, but it helped immensely that the board of trustees, our 9-member board of trustees, were entirely bought in.
Makes a huge difference.
It does. And so there was about a 3-year period, maybe 2 to 3 years, where we had a standing update on our board agenda that was competency-based education update, where we're coming and talking about, hey, here's the programs, here's the pain points. We're making progress on this goal you said. There was a very ambitious goal in 2020, said by 2025, transition everything you can to competency-based education unless there's safety concerns or accreditation concerns.
Got it.
It was a lofty goal. I think we understood we probably wouldn't get there, but we were striving for that. Having that at the top, and that commitment that this isn't a fad, this isn't something that in a year when a new software comes out, we're going to change. We're in it for the long run. And so that was extremely helpful in the change management front.
And a lot of institutions have followed your lead. And I know you get a lot of folks that are asking you about all the things we just talked about, the change management, the model, the leadership, the employer relationships, all those kinds of things. But it's just a great example of how we can innovate higher education, and under your leadership, the institution has done just an incredible job of that. You've also done some really unique things in the world of secondary education, high schools and so on. And that's a world that's innovating as well. And maybe in ways that people don't recognize. I had the opportunity late last year to be at the grand opening of a facility, an operation called Rocket Academy that is meeting high school students where they are in a really, really innovative way. And I know you and your team have had a huge relationship and been a huge part of the leadership of that organization. One of my good friends, Mike Dietrich, actually chairs the board of directors there. I'm happy to mention that. And Mike's doing an incredible job along with the leadership team of that organization. But talk to us about Rocket Academy and what it is and how it's different.
Yeah, appreciate you bringing this up. So Rocket Academy came about from the vision of the previous superintendent, Chad, for the Cedar Grove, Belgium School District. Chad, a great guy, someone I was proud to call a friend, where he approached the college and said, hey, what would it look like if we created not an alternative school, but a school where our high school students who are interested in the manufacturing pathways can come to that school to not learn basic high school tech ed, but integrated manufacturing education with college credits attached to it, so that those students at Rocket Academy could either start a pathway to Lakeshore College upon graduation or complete the pathway within the school so that they could be employed by our manufacturing partners right out of high school. And we worked with Cedar Grove Belgium School District to help develop that. We were very fortunate that the college was able to secure a grant from the National Science Foundation to help offset some of the upstart costs related to getting qualified faculty. But it has been a home run for the community and countywide. And when I hear people talk about Rocket Academy and the pride they have in it, and the pride when I see parents who talk about it, is really, really special. And a couple of graduations ago, we had our first batch of Rocket Academy students who were crossing the Lakeshore College graduation stage to get their college degree before they had finished high school.
It's amazing.
That's really cool.
Right.
And they're proud. Their families are proud. The community's proud. And so it's just a really interesting way of thinking of, let's move away from high school dual enrollments where colleges are teaching college classes in the high school.
Correct. Yep.
Let's maybe move away from this model of just offering a collection of classes. Right. Or let's maybe think we'd be spending our time and resources to target those students who are going to take English 101, or microeconomics, right? Who are on that trajectory already to a Madison, to a Green Bay or Oshkosh based on their family demographics. They're going to be okay. But what if we started targeting people who maybe aren't higher ed bound or maybe don't like learning in a classroom setting, being lectured, but want to start using their hands? And how can we create pathways for those students to find meaningful employment or meaningful education post-graduation? Because, we believe firmly at Lakeshore College in raising the educational attainment rate in our communities. That's just by nature of working in higher education.
Of course.
And so let's reach those students who maybe because of family circumstances or whatever aren't thinking about college. How can we reach them in the high school to get them on a college pathway? Because we know students who take dual enrollment classes in high school are, one, more likely to enroll in college post-graduation, and they're more likely to graduate from higher education on time than their peers. So it's a real win-win, creating a lot of stackable pathways so that folks can come on and off at multiple times. But we are very proud of the work we do with Rocket Academy, and we provide dual enrollment opportunities for every high school in our college's district, both public and private.
Well, and I think that word proud is an important word. And as I mentioned, I've had an opportunity to spend time at Rocket Academy, to spend time around the students. And for folks that haven't had that experience, these kids would absolutely amaze you with what they know, with what they're able to do, with how professional they are, all the job skills that they have, how they stand up, they greet you at the door, they shake your hand, they're confident. I've been to my share of high school graduations from traditional high schools, and I've been to my share now of graduation ceremonies from institutions like Rocket Academy. And I will tell you that the students that are walking across the stage from an institution like Rocket Academy have every bit the pride as of a valedictorian of a traditional high school. I mean, they're proud, they're excited, and it's an and, not an or. We're not saying, do I do higher education or do I graduate from high school and go into the workforce? Look, you've got all these on-ramps and off-ramps. You can earn your associate's degree while you're going to high school, walking across the second stage before you do the first one. I mean, it's just a really, really, really cool model. And all the way, by the way, earning industry-relevant certifications as well, which when we talk about competency-based education, we talk about different high school models, we talk about how we're innovating in higher ed. I know that's been a really, really important aspect for you, and I know the institution, Lakeshore College, well enough to know that you're doing a lot of different credentials and certifications and micro certifications. I want to focus on one because I've been intimately involved with it. I've gotten to know over the course of the last couple of years one of your deans, Rachel Krupline, who's just a great leader, a great innovator, and has done some great work with the Smart Automation Certification Alliance. Full disclosure, as our audience already knows, I'm on the national board. I'm a huge advocate for that model, just because I think they get it right when it comes to how we set up a certification body. But talk about that. You're a strong advocate as well. Why are industry-recognized certifications like those from the Smart Automation Certification Alliance so important and such an integral part of what you're doing?
Great way to tee up that question. I don't want to come off as too cute here, but they're important because our industry partners are telling us they're important.
Awesome.
And so when your local employers are saying, hey, this is important for us that our employees have or have access to, at Technical College, your antenna goes up and says, cool, let's get that role in there.
Right.
So we really leaned in under Rachel's leadership to the SACA certifications as part of a grant we received from Governor Evers of their Wisconsin Innovation Grant. Yep. And we were very interested in advanced manufacturing and automation, and how in a rural college like ours, where we're not on a bus line, how can we take that education in a very compressed, compartmentalized environment out to communities, out to other rural high schools, community-based organizations, or employers to provide them the industry certifications that they need to find meaningful employment or move up in meaningful employment, period. And so, they're important because we're told they're important by our employers, period.
Which is awesome. And it's music to my ears to hear that, because for so long, and as somebody who spent time in industry, a lot of time in industry, I wasn't familiar with micro-credentials in those days. And I just think in the last 10 years, in fact, I know we've started to recognize that employers who, they may say, well, give me a warm body, give me somebody that'll come to work today and every day and stay off of drugs and take some direction. That's who I want. And it's like, okay, you could have that, but what if you can have this whole list of competencies that people would come to work job ready? How would that feel? deal. Oh, that's awesome. And then they, again, not to pick on SACA, but I'm intimately familiar. You sit down and you say, well, this person has a certification in basic ACDC or electric relay control or Industry 4.0 or robotics or whatever. Is that important? The employers are saying it's important. And you're able to, in the same way with CBE, that we're able to focus specific competencies on specific roles. We can create a competency portfolio of certifications that match certain roles once students are in industry as well. None of this innovation happens without funding. I think if there's a common theme through several of your answers, Paul, talking about NSF grant funding for Rocket Academy, talking about innovation grant funding from our governor here in Wisconsin, the governor's office, Governor Tony Evers, which I believe was flow-through money too from the federal government. But grant funding, that's come up a few times. You've managed to gain $28 million in grant funding since joining the college. I mean, that's just an insane amount of money. I know people would love to hear your secret recipe here for securing grant funding.
Yeah. Well, just a point of correction there. It's now $32 million.
Oh, fair enough. Awesome. Our research is 3 days old, so thank you for correcting us.
So, we have prioritized as an institution grant funding because we want to diversify our funding streams at the college. And as a community college, we want to be bringing in dollars to our community that are spent in our community to better students in our communities. We're able to do that because when we prioritize it, 2 phenomenal grants team. So we invest in a grants team that finds grants, writes successful grants, and a team, my grants team, I would probably put that up against any grants team in higher ed, period, both 2-year and 4-year colleges. So they're very good. They care about the college, they care about the mission, and they write great grants. But, the second is we have at Lakeshore College, I'm biased, we have a quality product.
Sure.
So when we're writing for grants, we're starting on third base because we have a quality foundation to build on.
Sure.
And so that's, we're very proud of all of our grants, state level, federal level, and it's a reflection of our hard work and our quality products.
And I've got a really good friend who spends a lot of time thinking about grant funding, who says, somebody says, well, I want $1 million in grant funding. And they say, well, then you have to have $1 million idea. And it's kind of the same idea. If you've got $1 million result, if you've got $1 million idea, if you've already got a track record of spending grant funding efficiently, spending it, conscientiously, and also to your point, having this incredible legacy of a great college, having produced graduates year in and year out and doing workforce training and, reaching out to your high schools and all the great things that you're doing, that makes the story pretty easy to tell.
And I would add, your point is well taken about if you want $1 million, have $1 million idea, that we have the capacity at Lakeshore College institution-wide to think about the future. And so we're not just applying for grants just to get money because we need this right now or this. We're able to visualize where we want to be going in 2 or 3 years. We visualize with partners like the Sierra Grove Belgium School District,
sure,
partners like Sargento, to think where we want to go in the future. And that thinking is really institution-wide, which makes the job of finding and writing grants, I don't want to say easier, but it's a little bit easier that way. It's still a very hard job, but a little bit easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's all about winning the grant, right? So writing the grant and winning the grant and having great partners. And the other partnership I want to give a shout out to is your incredible partnership with the American Association of Community Colleges. And I know you've been super active with that organization. Lots of stuff going on. I think I just saw a LinkedIn post about a CEO search that you've been involved in. Talk about the AACC, your role there, and why not just being involved locally, but also being involved on a national scale is important to you, Paul.
Sure. So the American Association of Community Colleges, or AACC, is the national advocacy unit for the nation's 1,100 2-year community and technical colleges.
Got it.
I was honored to have been elected by my peers to that board a little over a year ago. And the reason it's important is, even though we're a local community technical college, we're part of the broader sector. And I'm a big believer that if you want to be involved in the sector, you have to be involved in the sector. And so the service on this board allows us to be involved in the dialogue on the national level.
Right.
It allows us to bring the unique perspective of a technical college in the Midwest to policy discussions that are happening. And that's important. It gives our college, it gives our state and our community a disproportionate role in the nationwide discussions. And, when you think of the American Association of Community Colleges, why it's important for advocacy, a lot of that's happening in Washington, D.C. to secure opportunities for two-year colleges to grow. Now, I can pinpoint really clearly why that matters with a provision in the big, beautiful bill that allows for Workforce Pell. So Pell grants are entitlement-based grants to help low-income individuals pay for college. Mm-hmm. It used to only be available if you were taking a college degree.
Right.
Now with Workforce Pell, there's going to be opportunities for students to draw down their Pell for short-term training opportunities,
right,
like CDL, like nursing assistant, like SACA, all of this. And so I think we're going to see an explosion here of short-term training that is meaningful for people and communities. And that's a direct result of the work the American Association of Community Colleges is doing to advocate on behalf of all colleges.
And that's just a terrific example. And we could debate, and lots of people could debate the merits of the big, beautiful bill. And I've heard a lot of it already. Yeah. But the truth of the matter is that regardless of how people feel about that, there are some great nuggets in there, especially for workforce training, community colleges, technical colleges, and so on. And I'm glad that you highlighted that. I guess I would be interested in learning a little bit more about just in general, what kind of leadership you think the community college world needs, and especially, let's kind of talk about that in the context a little bit of funding and what's happening, what has happened with funding. I mean, I live and breathe technical community colleges and technical training, and funding's been pretty good for the last 5 years for a variety of reasons. Would be curious about not just how we lead on the national level and what's important for community and technical colleges, but also how we lead on funding and what you're expecting the next 5 years.
So it's important that when we think about funding for community technical college systems, that those of us in the sector recognize the reason we're, especially in Wisconsin, doing good funding-wise,
right,
is because we are quality institutions. We are committed to our mission, and we are supporting our employers.
Right.
And so it is absolutely critical as we go into the next 5 years that we continue to maintain that brand standard,
right,
and not slip on that. So that's a big thing. When you think of leadership, we've got great leadership here in the state. AACC, we're hiring a new CEO there to be our chief advocate in Washington, D.C. I think what's important there is leaders who understand the role, scope, and mission of two-year colleges, who are the walking, talking logos of two-year colleges, and are always in the room when those conversations are being had with policymakers,
right,
and not defaulting to other associations with other interests, which aren't bad interests, but they're just other interests,
right,
making sure that our interests are equally weighted at that table.
A fully educated policymaker, regardless of what level of government, regardless of what types of decisions they're making, is really, really important. And I know the AACC is playing a really, really important role in making sure that, not just our colleges are informed and educated on the future of education, but also that our public policymakers are, is super, super important. And I'm glad you mentioned the great leadership here in the state of Wisconsin as well. I had an opportunity to meet with President Layla Merrifield probably a week and a half ago, give or take.
Fantastic, yeah.
Spent a good hour and a half, 2 hours with Layla. Wonderful, wonderful leader doing great things at the state level, and believes, as I do, that we do need to shake up the model and continue to innovate in ways that are good for students, good for employers, and good for the state as a whole. And I think set an example in a lot of cases for what the rest of the country can be doing. Not that there aren't great things happening all over the United States, but fantastic things happening in Wisconsin. And as much as we were talking about shaking up the model of education, I have a couple more questions for you, Paul, before we wrap up our time here on the Tech Ed podcast. First one is this. We all had our own education pathway. You had yours, and certainly have spent tremendous amounts of time in education following your formal education yourself. Are there things that you believe or think about in terms of education that might surprise people or a little bit outside of the lines, if you would?
What I've experienced across multiple states is people know their local community and technical college, and many of them are graduates from it, but they don't always know the full, depth and breadth of what two-year colleges do.
Right.
If I could just give you a quick story here, it might be a little...
Please.
I think does a great job of demonstrating this. So Jonathan grew up in our community, and in high school, Jonathan dropped out of high school. Smart guy,
right,
just wasn't working for him then, wanted to work, make some money. So he went to work. And what he started to notice after a couple of years of dropping out was his peers at his job were getting promotions, or they were getting new jobs, or they were changing careers. And what he realized is the common theme of all those folks moving up was they had a high school degree. Many of them had a college degree. So he said, you know what, I'm going to go back to get my high school equivalency degree or my GED. And Lakeshore provides that in our community. And so he started and stopped, because it's hard. You've been out of school for a while to get back in that swing. It can be intimidating. Started and stopped. But then he finally doubled down and said, you know what, now I'm going to get my degree. And he was taking his classes, made some bad life choices, found himself in jail. But while he was in jail, he continued in our GED program that we offer in the jail.
Yeah.
He got his GED, and when he was released, one of the first things he did was come to Lakeshore College to enroll in one of our programs, graduated from the program in a year, now owns and operates a small business in Manitowoc County.
Wow. And
you think about that, only at a college like Lakeshore, our colleges are uniquely American inventions. Can you go from a high school dropout who is in jail to a college graduate business owner?
Right.
That happens at Lakeshore all the time. Not that specific story, and that's just something that, the more we can tell the story of our depth and breadth to continue to surprise people so that hopefully one day when we tell this story, they're not surprised. I think that would be a great thing.
In the end, the most important thing that any of us do is change the lives of others for the better. And what a great example of how we can do that through our community and technical colleges across the country, and specifically Lakeshore with all the flexibility that you offer and letting somebody know that it's never too late to make up for some decision you may have made that you wish you hadn't, and you can always find a better way. And in the case of Jonathan, what a perfect example, Paul, and thank you so much for sharing that example with us. It's just a great story about the power of our community colleges and technical colleges here in the state of Wisconsin and across the country as well. Speaking of across the country, you grew up in various parts of the country. You mentioned earlier Colorado Springs. So I want to take us back in time a little bit to the 15-year-old Paul Carlsen. You've got your whole life ahead of you. You don't know that you're going to be heading off to Georgia for your doctorate and what you did before that, and then eventually becoming the leader of this great institution here in the state of Wisconsin. You're 15. You have your whole life ahead of you. If you could go back and give that young man one piece of advice, what is it? Okay, so wasn't the most clearest thinker at 15.
Right. I did a lot of things a 15-year-old does that maybe were counterproductive. But
you're not alone on that, by the way. We can make a list together. Go ahead.
But at 15, I'm starting to think about college.
Right.
Both my parents graduated from college. So it was never a question in our household of if you would go, but where. Right. And I'm thinking of just getting out of there, going to college, getting a job, getting out of the household, doing my own thing. And if I could go back to that 15-year-old, I would say, yeah, continue on that trajectory, going places, doing things. But man, once you leave home, go home more often.
There you go.
Because, when you're 15, your parents won't live forever.
Right.
But you kind of think they will. Yep. And then it catches up with you really quickly. And so give myself that advice to go home a lot more often than I did, because that would have been time well spent.
Absolutely. That's great advice for anybody. And we get a lot of answers to this question. That's the first time we've gotten that one. And that is a beautiful, beautiful answer. And we always, we think about our roots. We think about where we come from. We think about the impact that our parents have. And we think about things that we take for granted. And that's one that's really, really easy to take for granted. So for all of our young listeners, as you move into whatever happens after you move out of the house, remember to go back home and see mom and dad. You won't have them forever, and cherish that time while you do. Awesome, awesome advice. A tremendous conversation we've had here with our guest, Paul Carlsen, president of Lakeshore College here in Wisconsin. Great conversations about everything from competency-based education to how we secure grant funding to how we innovate in higher ed to how we innovate in our secondary institutions. Really, really interesting conversation, Paul, and thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to our audience as well for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. Lots of different resources we talked about over the course of this conversation. We'll link them all up as we do every week in the show notes. We have the best show notes in the business, so be sure to check those out. They will be at techedpodcast.com/Carlsen. That is techedpodcast.com/ and catch the spelling here, /CARLSEN, techedpodcast.com/Carlsen. When you're done there, come find us on social media. We are on LinkedIn. We are on TikTok. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook. Wherever you spend time, whatever channel is your favorite for social media, you will find the Tech Ed Podcast there. When you stop in, say hello. We would love to hear from you. Can't wait to see you next week for another great episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. I'm Matt Kirchner, and thank you for being with us.